So like I said, in talking about death and dying, certainly we're talking about kind of a focus on late adulthood and the progression, the natural progression that we all hope we will, live a long, fulfilling life. But we'll also talk about what happens if death comes sooner than the end of your life, and then how that process might differ. But one thing that we're going to be doing for the next class is looking a little bit about this final life review that people go through, often in late adulthood or in the face of dying. If you've been diagnosed with a terminal illness or something is happening where you realize that this is your life expectancy is nearing its end. So as you're going through that, we will do something called a life review, where we're looking for meaning in life. And so as people are going through these stages of grappling with their impending death, they'll often want to, resolve some things or come to terms with things in their life. But as you're kind of looking back and reflecting on meaning, people are looking for, what was your purpose? There's a need for purpose. There's values, a sense of efficacy, right? So what did you accomplish? What did you contribute? What kind of generativity or legacy did you leave to, whether it be through your family or through work? Somehow you feel like you have had meaning, you've had value, and then self-worth, right? Can you accept both the bad and the good? Remember, the positivity effect can be a healthy coping mechanism near the end of life. But people will pretty naturally go through this process, and you may be even going through this all the way through adulthood, right? As you're making decisions and trying to figure out what your life's path is going to be, because ultimately, don't we want to be happy? Sometimes people do this crazy thing that I call chasing happiness, and nothing is never good enough. And they're like, oh, well, maybe I'll have this career and I'll go, or maybe I'll move to this part of the country and I get a new start, it'll be better there. Or maybe if I just, had a nicer car. Or, if only I lost 10 pounds. If only I, looked younger. All these things. So it's like, you're never satisfied with the here and now. You're constantly, it's like and American culture can do that to us with this whole, keeping up with the Joneses. That saying, right? And so you're perpetually dissatisfied, and you're constantly trying to grasp at things, and rather than sort of relishing in the moment. So as people get older, they naturally will stop doing that a little bit. Probably not everybody, but isn't maybe the ultimate goal to reach self-actualization? That's what Maslow called it, right? And reach a level of happiness where you can look back and go, I made mistakes along the way, but I led a meaningful life, and I have some strong relationships to show for it. So what I want you guys to do for the next class is do your own little mini life review. Even if you're only 18 years old, you can still do, a little mini life review. And it can be super deep and meaningful, and profound if you want to, or it can be cute, or it can be lighthearted. I've had all sorts of different, these are called aphorisms. Aphorisms are words of wisdom. I've had people write a whole paragraph. Occasionally people have written a whole paper. You don't need to do that. It can be a sentence. It can be, anything that is reflecting, why you're proud of your age today, especially if you're still really young. So Randy Pausch was what was his Yeah, the last lecture, but I'm trying to think, what did he teach? Was he computer science? Computer science, right. I'm like, what did he teach? I couldn't remember. It's been a couple years since I read. I used to assign that book in class, and I've also assigned Tuesdays with Maury in this class too. But Randy Pausch, he died in his early 40s, so his process was, he had to come to terms with dying and putting all things in perspective and putting things in place for his family, because he had 3 very young children, and it was a completely different stage of life for him in going through this process. And he, with the help of an author, wrote this book called The Last Lecture. And actually, it was based off of a lecture that he gave at Carnegie Mellon that they do usually for people when they retire. And that's kind of typical of a lot of universities. When someone retires, they give their last lecture and everybody goes. But then they continue on and usually become professor emeritus and so on. So Randy Pausch was only 42 years old and gave his last lecture. And you can find it on YouTube, and it's really inspiring. And he has a lot of, pretty neat little aphorisms and elegant quotes that are in that book. And then Maury Schwartz, he died of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. He was much older. It was more typical, his developmental pathway. But he also, of course, the book written by Mitch Albom has all these little life lessons. The book is set up like a course because he was a sociology professor. Has anybody read that book? A couple of people. So, and Maury Schwartz has lots of good aphorisms that are in there. Because if you've found meaning in your life, you don't want to go back, you want to go forward. And anytime I do hear a young adult or middle-aged adult say, oh, the best years of my life are behind me, or oh, high school was the best, or college was so much fun, I loved college, and if only I could go back and do it. Or having regrets, I want to go back and change. If only I had made this decision and done this instead. That's really self-defeating thinking. What's the point? That's counterfactual thinking. The shoulda, coulda, woulda. That's not helpful. So Maury Schwartz says it very simply. If you found meaning, you don't want to go back. You just always are moving forward. And, you can't, it's just not, it doesn't serve a purpose to get stuck somewhere thinking that you can, go back. So come up with your own little thing. Do not use a proverb or a poem or scripture written by someone else. I want it to be original, your thoughts, okay? Occasionally people, they'll grab a proverb. You know what a proverb is, right? Yeah. Don't grab a proverb. I want it to be original. And, obviously, this could be really personal, and if you don't want to share something really personal with me, then don't go there. But we'll do an activity in class, and we will share only if you want to, okay? Only if you want to. But please bring the copy to class. I think you'll be surprised as a couple people, because there's always a few people that want to share. As a couple people share and read their aphorism, you may realize that you want to share too. And you're like, wait a second, this is fun. This is share time, right? It's show and share. That's what they call it in preschool. Okay, so we're going to talk now about what are we talking about with death? There's different types of death, and how do we define death? How does the court system or the law or the hospital define death, and then how do you define death? And then how, if you are facing death at different stages in your lifespan, how does that differ, and what are the most common causes of death, depending on the age? And we're looking at statistics in a lot of ways there. And then, should people really be educated about death and dying? At what age do you do that? When is it appropriate? But let's kind of do a little activity here. Okay, so people use different sort of analogies of death or euphemisms in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's used as a punishment. You know, if you do that, if you take that, I'll kill you. You know, I mean, like, really? Okay. But it's like becomes sort of a saying, or, you know, you're going to be deader than a doornail. Right? I mean, these are sort of sayings that are out there. But then, or kick the bucket, you know, that's a nice one, right? But then it also has some positive meanings to it. You've got, you know, it has a transition. You've passed on. Sometimes I get like, I don't know why that term to me sometimes sounds funny. She passed. I don't know why. I'm like, she died. I don't know. Sometimes it just depends, kind of the context or how it's used. Sometimes it sounds funny to me. The hereafter, so like it also has this different meaning of like almost reward, right? So it can be used in a number of different ways. Are there any other sayings or things, symbolism too, right? Like you see a hearse. What are other things that you associate with death or dying? Say it again. Ash. Black, right? People wear black. I made sure I didn't wear black today. Yeah. Say that louder. The Reaper? The Grim Reaper, yeah. I don't know if that's how you spell it. Is it two E's? I don't know. Yeah, Ashley? Crying? Yeah, Carmen? Loved ones left behind. You'll see that in a obituary or a eulogy. Yeah.
Sometimes certain tattoos people have, like, carry memories of people who died.
So people will want to do something physical, like a tattoo or a memorial. You know, like who's the memorial for? The people left behind. Thank you. Oh my gosh. I think it's kind of interesting how people in their will and testament will put all these details into, you know, all this maybe sometimes things that the family was like, what, you know, she wanted us to do what, you know, and it's like, well, okay, there's certain things that, you know, you want to, you know, grant their wishes, but who's it for? It's really for the people who are still living, right? So, but if the memorial is a testament to that individual and you're doing things that were their wishes, then hopefully there's a mesh, right? Yeah? Rest in peace. Or yeah, you'll see that, R.I.P. Yeah.
Sometimes if they have like a disease or something, it's like the pain goes away, so it's like more of a positive thing.
Okay, so if they've been sick and they've been in pain, they've been suffering, then it's pain relief. So no more pain. My pen is dying here. Or relief. Yeah, Vadim? Oh yeah, so you've got these, the skull and crossbones. That would be a symbolism then. Did you have something? Yes, Stephanie?
Just different pieces of my house.
Okay, so life after death. What is going on life after death? Is there life after death? Anything else? So we've got kind of like all ends of the spectrum, right? And then you get the word loss. And loss can mean a lot of different things too, right? So get in your small groups and kind of share your death anxiety results. And is this something that you have ever thought of? Maybe think back, at what age were you when you first realized that that animals, living things, and people die? And do you remember that moment? Do you remember your thought process as a child? Is this something that you think about ever? I mean, you're all very young, so and you appear to be healthy to me. So share in groups. You know, if something happens unexpected before late adulthood, and you are in, say you're in a really terrible accident, you don't die, but you're on life support or you're, you know, in a coma, who's going to make the decision on your health care and what to do? I mean, probably for a lot of you it would be your parents, right? Even if you're 30 years old, if you're unattached, that's probably going to be who makes the decisions. This is an area where if you're in a cohabitating relationship and not legally married, and you'd rather have that person make the decisions over your mom and dad, then you've got to put it in writing and have it signed off on by an attorney. Otherwise, that, you know, say you're 26 years old, your partner, your boyfriend, isn't going to be able to make the decisions. They'll go to your mom and dad. And so that kind of thing, you know, you won't think about that when you're 26. You know, so the difference between functional death and brain death, functional death is no breathing, no heart rate, right? So, you know, flatline, they've tried to revive the person, and they have no respiration, and then, of course, no heartbeat. Brain death is different. Brain death, you could have someone that's even on limited, you know, like they could be totally on life support, or not even be on life support, but their breathing and their, you know, basic functioning is working, but they have no brain activity. So they look at the brain waves and they see no electrical activity in their frontal lobe. So essentially the only thing that's working is the brain stem, and that's what's keeping, you know, the heartbeat going. So depending on the state, depending on the country, depending on where you live, they will define legal death in different ways. Some places will still say it has to be functional death. And this kind of gets into what your CTR is going to be on, what your paper is on, in looking at suicide, physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia, and maybe a question to think about is, if someone is declared brain dead, but they still have functional, they're not, you know, they're still breathing, but they're completely in a coma. Like the case of Terri Schiavo, where 12 years she was in a coma, no brainwave activity. They had a feeding tube. They had, but it was really a really difficult case because her eyes would open and she'd have reflexive reactions, like she would blink and things. And so it was a really, really drawn out case and very complicated. And so, you know, taking her off the life support, you know, is that euthanasia, or is that just allowing her a natural death? It gets really complicated, right? And then what about someone who has a terminal illness, and then you actually take action to speed it up? Is there a difference? Because it's in some people's minds, pulling the plug and taking the phenobarbital, or what's it called? Phenobarbital. Taking that solution and putting you, and you know, and that's speeding it up. They see it as the same thing, and other people do not see it as the same thing. And then there are laws of whether this should be allowed for someone to make that independent choice, and what are the actions that they have to take to go through in order to have the court order to order the meds to have this administered and have it done. So you're writing your response on that. And I gave you the Procon website, which is a really great resource for a lot of different controversial issues, but I have you directed to the euthanasia page, and there are just tons of arguments on both sides. So you can use a number of different resources there. The video that you're watching, I mean, it's really somewhat elective. Like if you feel that this is something that you don't want to watch, it's not required. But I think that it gives you a good picture of like a real case and a real person and his thought process. So you know, I'll leave that up to you though, because I know I've had people with anxiety disorder watch it and have a panic attack. So you decide whether you want to watch it or not. So that's just a fair warning. Okay, so we'll talk about that next class. But now what about when we're talking about death with around children? Yeah, okay, if you want to shield your child from death, then you can't watch Disney movies. Because there's always a dead mother or a dead father. You know, I mean, think of all the Disney movies where there's no mother. I mean, like almost all of the princesses have no mother. And I think it seems, I don't know, is that the typical, I sure hope that's not a fairy tale. I mean, but of course, you know, the Lion King, right? I mean, his father gets trampled, and you're watching this happen, and it's a cartoon, but he's dead, you know? And so, like, is this going to be your death conversation with your child, or how do we have that conversation, or do we shield children from death or knowing about it, or how do you guys remember when you first had that realization that oh, things die and people die?
My son has been exposed to 2 deaths this past year, and he's really concerned with it, really worried about dying. He asks every day about dying. When am I going to die? How am I going to die? What happens when you die? It's just, I don't know. They should be exposed, but you have to definitely know how to talk to them about it.
And your son is only 5.
Yeah.
So 5 is about the age when they first start to realize that, you know, you don't live forever, and that things die, people die. I mean, if you have a pet that dies, then that's an easier first experience with death, as opposed to, you know, like grandma, right? That's a lot harder for them to conceptualize. You know, like, what do you mean? Yeah, Aaron?
I think, you know, when I was younger, I didn't experience a death before I learned about death. So we had, apparently, before I was born, a dog, Pussy, and Pussy got hit by a car in front of our house. And my sister knew about the dog, right? So my mom decided, it was really traumatic for my sister, who was like 9.5 years old. So she decided that she would like share the story about Pussy. So she would like give us all these little stories about Pussy, like the time she ate the German chocolate cake and like this and that. And I'd be like, well, what happened to the dog? And she's like, oh, well, you know, she got out of the yard and she got hit by a car. And I said, well, what happened when she got hit by the car? And she said, well, she died. She's not here anymore. That's why we don't have her. And you know, so like, I think bringing death up with your kids makes it less scary.
Yeah.
And also, like, my dad's dad died when he was really young, so we grew up without one. And my mom's mother died of breast cancer when she was in high school, so she, like, went through high school without a mother, you know? So, like, and a father, actually, because he died before that. So I didn't have grandparents either, so that sort of helped bring up the conversation. And I think through all of that, when I did experience my first, like, death of a close family member, it was in 6th grade. I wasn't completely devastated by it. Like, it wasn't earth-shattering for me. Like, it was a thing that happened to people die. And it was sad, yes. And, like, you know, I still miss my uncle and whatever, but it didn't destroy my world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, if they have an understanding of it at some level, you know, the problem is if something unexpected happens and they cognitively don't have that development yet, it could be difficult to explain it, or and the natural questioning is just going to be even more because of their their age. Yeah, Ashley.
I know my first experience with that is when I was young too. I was probably I was in third grade or something, or second grade, and I had a hamster that was the vicious hamster, and it was one of the worst experiences in the world. And I remember normally parents would just take the pet away and go do whatever, but my stepdad felt so bad about it because I had no idea what happened that we actually had a memorial for it.
Sure. Yep.
He explained to me what was going to happen, and in his terms, he said it was going into, like a pet heaven. So
Hamster heaven.
Watching down on us and stuff like that, and so that helped me transition. But then, like you say, that's completely different from when a loved one passes away. But it gave me that cognitive thinking that I know that regardless on if someone passes away, they're still going somewhere. So it helped me to transition from a pet to, I was still sad about it regardless with their family and stuff. My pets are my pets. But it helped me to understand, it's going to happen and you just have to, pretty much deal with what happens and grieve in your own way and know that people grieve at different paces and they can grieve for long periods of time or grieve for short periods of time, and you just have to let that happen. It's natural.
Yeah. And when actually burying a pet can have a significant meaning to the family, or when our cat died a few years ago, I didn't want her body back from the vet, and we weren't going to pay the expense for the cremation, so we didn't get anything back, right? But we memorialized her in different ways. She died around Christmas, so we made a Christmas ornament with her picture on it and hung it on the tree. And then we have other things that make you go, we remember. So, and that's kind of like what happens then, when a loved one dies, we say, well, they're gone, but we still have all these memories, and we can look at the pictures and see all these things that we, learned from them. And so we have different things in our house that my grandpa built. And even though my kids have never met my grandpa because he died way before they were born, we talk about it. They know about him. They ask questions, and so the understanding of that, they're not here anymore. They're already kind of getting that message, and we don't really know. You don't really know how a person is going to react the first time they experience it. I'll tell you, the first experience I had with real death with a person was when I was in 9th grade, and it was a child that I babysat. Talk about, first experience with death, unexpected. I spoke at his service. I can't believe I did it. I can't believe now, in retrospect, looking back, that I had the strength as a 14-year-old to stand up there and speak. And I told a story about things that he did. And he had he was born with a birth defect in his heart, and it was just. But yeah, I remember after I spoke and going back to my seat, my whole family was all just they were all falling apart just listening to me, and I needed to do it, right? I needed so the service is for the people who are still there. So children don't have a concept really until about age 5. When you see very young children at a service, often you probably don't want to have babies and very young children at services because there's kind of not a point. That's why they often have a nursery or something, and then at the gathering afterwards or whatever it is that the family's going to do, then children can attend that. Just because they're just really no conceptual ability to understand it. And then even when they get a little bit older, if there's a viewing, they don't do that so much in the Pacific Northwest, but in the Midwest, oh boy, we do. We do viewings. That's a Midwestern thing. And when my grandma died and they had the viewing the night before, my kids weren't with me, but one of my cousins, her kids were there, and they wanted to go, and they wanted to look at Granny, and she was like, I don't know if they should look, I don't know, do they really understand? And I said to her, and she was kind of asking me my opinion, and I go, well, you know, your 3-year-old isn't going to understand. So I'm not sure that it's good for him to look at her, but that's your decision, you're her parent. Your older ones, they will understand. Her older ones were like 7 and 10. I'm like, they will understand. Again, that will be the last time they see her. But actually, so she went in and we viewed her body, and she said, I'm definitely going to have the older boys come in and see, because they visited her in the hospital when she looked awful. That's why they do viewings, is because they look better sometimes if you've seen them when they were really sick. She was bloated and just, it was really, really awful, I guess, in the last couple of weeks. So she wanted them to come and see. But that's a personal thing, right? And that's also a personal thing for adults as well. So around middle childhood, they really start to understand that, and then understand the customs. So I told you I had a second cousin that died over New Year's, and I went to her service just last month. And it was a very non-traditional service, non-religious. It was a little bit not what I'm used to, and we released balloons outside. And I went by myself with my parents, and so I took pictures and stuff of the balloons going up in the sky, and I came home and I showed them to my kids, and Camden said, he goes, I really like that. I really like that tradition. He goes, it's like she's flying away and like she's free. I thought that was kind of insightful. But then he says, what's going to happen to all that waste then? Will it kill a bird? Which is totally true. That's exactly what I was thinking too, that the birds are going to choke on all these balloons, the latex that's now out there in the world. I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, man, this kid is too smart. But, you know, I think that understanding that, and of course, death in childhood is usually accidents. The most common cause of death in childhood is accidents. Occasionally, you know, you'll see some childhood diseases, but that's a much smaller percentage. The larger percentage is either, you know, like actual physical accidents or motor vehicle accidents or child abuse, and then a small percent that's illness. In adolescence, now, you know, it's kind of funny. They get this sort of, oh, this isn't going to happen to me, right, because I'm young and healthy, and they get that whole invincibility thing going on with, that's all about that egocentrism as their brain is developing, and you guys have done a really good job of understanding what's going on in brain development that explains that way of thinking. And so they're really, really not thinking about death. Really at all, unless they suffer from depression. If they suffer from depression, then they may fixate on death. And actually, when you see depressive patients and you look at their brains under a brain scan, they don't have frontal lobe activity really at all. And that's because that pessimistic thinking and not, you know, realizing that there's something that's, you know, something out there to look forward to. That's why they have difficulty in planning and making goals. So in adolescence, the most common causes of death are motor vehicle accidents, often drug or alcohol related, and then you know, a smaller percentage of illnesses, but then suicide is in the figures there. Okay? If they are diagnosed with a terminal illness, like leukemia or something like that, then they're probably going to have a stronger denial reaction because of their age, and more likely to go through a longer phase of depression than if you were older. And that only makes sense because they're missing out on a huge part of life. when you're in young adulthood, again, you are in the prime of your life. There's so much left that you haven't done that this is where, death just doesn't even seem like on the horizon. Kind of like it's like, what's the point in thinking about it? Because you're so healthy and you've got so much life to live, and it's self-defeating to think about it or worry about it. But then if you are diagnosed with, something, and your death then becomes more, you think about this impending death, it could have a stronger depressive reaction or anger reaction, thinking about all the things that you didn't get a chance to do. And again, we've got accidents, motor vehicle accidents being the leading cause of death in early adulthood. I think suicide hits a % there as well. And then kind of near the end of early adulthood, we start to have things like cancer that are creating a percentage of people who are dying in this age group. So it's essentially things that are, anomalies or unexpected. Then in middle adulthood, when someone's diagnosed with a life-threatening disease, it's not quite as surprising. Statistically, we see people with all sorts of different forms of cancer that are diagnosed in their 40s and 50s. This is one of my best friends from elementary school. I've talked about her before. She's a medical doctor. She's a physician. And she has a massive brain tumor on her right frontal and parietal lobe. And this is her. Back last summer, I met them down at Swedish. This was the night before her going into her second brain surgery. And so I got her a couple of our favorite movies from childhood. And, we visited together. And then she had her surgery the next day. They got 90% of the tumor out. And she ended up she was in the hospital only for a couple of days. And then she had some complications with brain swelling and had to go back in. She was in intensive care for like 10 days, and because she had a bone flap infection from the brain surgery, so that's a common complication. But she's doing really well now, but she does have cancer, so she's going through chemotherapy, and she's the one that just got the job at the UW Medical Clinic, so she's going to be practicing medicine in acute care. She's like, give me strep throat, give me a cold, I can treat that, She doesn't want to have, like a practice where she's got long-term management of patients. And her partner is also a physician. So, I experienced this, going through this with a friend, it makes it more real when you start thinking about that this could happen to anybody. But heart attack and stroke are the main causes then in middle adulthood, getting into more into your 50s. And then in late adulthood, cancer, stroke, heart disease are the #1 killers. But, I guess everybody dies eventually of a heart attack, right? It just depends on what's progressing up to that. This is my granny. And she had a heart aneurysm that got diagnosed about 5 years before she died. And at the time, they said, well, if you were younger, we would go in and do open heart surgery. But you're 85, 86 years old, or I can't remember exactly how old she was, so we don't recommend open heart surgery. So they didn't do anything. They just sent her home. And then she had a rupture. And then they did surgery, and she essentially never woke up from the surgery, and she was 91. So, and it's kind of interesting because in the moments between knowing that she had this thing going on, she had to make a decision whether she was going to have the surgery or not. And I remember her asking the doctors, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. And they said, well, either decision is not going to end up going home. It's going to be surgery and then a facility, or straight to a facility, because you can't live alone because you're very sick. And my dad's the oldest of the 6 children, and he's talking to her on the phone, and he should have flown out there because she was in Illinois. And as a woman of faith, we thought her reaction would have been acceptance. And she had a surprising reaction. My dad was pretty upset. She said, "No, I'm going to have surgery," and that was it. So it's kind of interesting how you think you're going to respond a certain way. I mean, she's a preacher's wife. She grew up and lived this life, and then you're faced with death, you react in a different way. You know, you don't know. You could say, "I'm going to be like this," and you have a different reaction. So thinking about, you know, as you're declining, as you're realizing that death is imminent, it's closer, you're closer to death than you are, you know, you've certainly, you know, lived most of your life, that means that you are at increased risk of depression. And the largest percent of people that commit suicide are white men over the age of 85. It's a pretty strong statistic. So, you know, depression and loneliness, you know, hopelessness, often it's men that have lost a spouse. We see women are caretakers. They're often the ones that have, you know, taken care of this guy for years. It's not uncommon for if there's a couple where the wife dies, either the husband will die within the next year, just naturally, or may go into a severe depression. It's kind of, has anybody had that happen in their family, where like one grandparent died and then the other one just like almost like they were connected? It happened to my grandparents on the other side of the family, but I think that it was that my grandpa held up such a front, taking care of her, that then after she died, like all the stress then just kind of finally like had that physical effect on him. So confronting death, all right. We have a theory here written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She wrote a book called Death and Dying, and it was written in 1969, and she came up with the stages of grieving, and it was based off of interviewing over 200 people who were terminally ill in the hospital, having to deal with the knowledge that this thing was happening. The reason I have a picture of my friend Jennifer here is you can tell that this photo was taken in class. And she's still alive, and she's still, you know, we still talk on Facebook, and I saw her last summer. This was a year ago. She came to class and did a lecture for us because she's been living and battling colon cancer for 8 years. So she was diagnosed at age 33, really unexpected, and she goes to chemotherapy every other week. She just had her 182nd round of chemotherapy last week. Yeah. She's had 7 surgeries. She's had all sorts of organs removed and moved around. She has she has pig tissue in her, somewhere in her abdomen. Yeah, she goes, yeah, that's always lovely to think about. She just had a radical hysterectomy 3 months ago that she believes is a result of all the chemotherapy. She thinks that the chemotherapy has caused these other problems. And people ask her, why do you do it? Why do you keep fighting? Why do you keep going to chemo? Most people would have gone through the stages of dealing with their imminent, you know, death and come to acceptance and stopped treatment. Well, I'll tell you why. When she got diagnosed, it was they diagnosed it when she was delivering her son. So he's a newborn baby. And so she kept making goals. I want to see him go to preschool. I want to see him go to kindergarten. And then she has another older son. So that's why she keeps doing it, you know. And so she's very inspirational. She has a blog that I'll put the link to online. Her blog is, or you can write it down right now, it's SaveTheBodies.com, BODIES. She said that, you know, there's all this attention about breast cancer awareness, and people get to wear these shirts that say Save the Boobies and go on walks and stuff. And she's like, maybe mine should be Save the Booties, right, because she has colon cancer. She's grateful she still can, you know, use the bathroom. Some people with colon cancer end up having to have colostomy bags and stuff, and she doesn't have that or anything. But she decided, well, wait a second, I don't want to just like be talking and writing about colon cancer. So, you know, and people are getting other parts of their bodies cut off and stuff. And so she just calls it Save the Bodies. So it's her blog, and she's actually an educator, and she has a library, a master's degree in library science, and she took Kübler-Ross's theory, and part of her blog, you have to kind of dig down in her blog because it's probably from over a year ago now, she took the theory and she applied herself going through these different stages. And she said that when she was going through the process of writing it, of course it was all after the fact, and she's, you know, she's sort of in this sort of weird continued phase between 3, 4, and 5. She kind of keeps going, and she told us that in class last year, she keeps going kind of back and forth because she's not accepted and stopped treatment and accepted that this is the end, because she continues to get clear scans. She still has cancer. That means that it's microscopic, it's somewhere in her body, you know, it's metastatic, stage 4. So she keeps plugging away, but she has to take antidepressants because she finds herself sliding back into depression. And but she uses this blog as a way to connect and to try to maybe help other people that are going through these phases. So, I mean, at first, you can imagine how you would go through if you're told that you have a terminal illness, and especially if you're not, you know, 80 years old. But even if you're 80 years old, you're going to be going through this first, you know, denial. Okay, no, not me. This kind of thing doesn't happen to me. How could this be me? Or, oh, the test is wrong. Let's do another test. They can't be right. Then you get the verification from the second and third opinion. Yes, you have this. Okay, then that turns into anger. So angry at the world, angry at God, angry at, you know, this feeling of hopelessness or an internal conflict or something going on. Then maybe you go through some bargaining. Okay, well, I'll turn my life around. Maybe if I just do this, then I can, you know, live a little bit longer. You know, and this could be bargaining with God, and Kübler-Ross wrote about that, or bargaining with kind of internally with yourself, right, as you're struggling through that process. But then that can fall into depression. Now, if you've read Tuesdays with Morrie by the story of Morrie Schwartz by Mitch Albom, he writes about, you almost think, oh, this guy, he was so positive, like he didn't suffer from depression. Well, there's a few passages in that book where he talks about bad days and how he allows himself to have a sad day, and he would allow himself to cry. And so it was still very healthy in his depression, right? But Kübler-Ross found that it was very typical for people to fall into a depression. And then the only way to move out of that is to accept, you know, your condition, and then move forward in whatever way you can, or however you decide to move forward. So my friend Jenny has accepted that she has a terminal illness, and it's kind of shocking when you first meet her. And even if you know, I've been friends with her for 23 years. so, or 22 years, something like that, since we were 18. It's kind of shocking the first time you hear her say it, but she says, well, I'll have chemotherapy for the rest of my life. I've just come to accept that. I've come to terms with it. We treat it as a chronic illness. I have a chronic illness. If I want to keep living, I have to do chemo. Until they come up with some other kind of cure, this is my path. And now her kids, she's got her oldest in middle school, and her youngest is in 3rd grade. So and the cancer was diagnosed when he was born. So, and to think about it, actually, the story, you got to read the blog, because they think that probably being pregnant saved her life, because she had a burst appendix, and that's what she first went in, and then they did, when they went in there, they saw the massive tumors that were down here. Her son was protecting her from all of this gunk that exploded in her lower abdomen. She would have gone septic. They cleaned it out, and she was okay. And then they did a C-section. So it's kind of a nice, like, oh wow, your baby saved your life, because it really did it protected her lungs, it protected her organs, her heart. But now he's getting pretty big. She's having an impact on their life. So she's come to terms and acceptance, but it is a little bit shocking talking to her. And she says, well, I'll just have chemo the rest of my life. How long that's going to be, I don't know. But there are some things about the theory that we can critique. This was the first person who systematically studied death and dying and wrote a theory about it. But it's only based on, a few people's experience. They interviewed over 200 people, but, that's not the whole population. How generalizable can it be? What if you don't have the time to go through all those stages? What if you get a diagnosis and you're going to be on the decline in 2 weeks, right? So you don't have enough time to go through all the stages. So there's probably more variability. It's not including anxiety. Other people going, so it's a loved one that's experiencing it. Other people will go through, so they've actually taken this theory and applied it toward grieving. So in the grieving process, you could also have that initial denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. You could go through the same stages in your grieving process. So, her theory has really sort of opened up a lot of doors into studying grieving and studying death and dying.